So, as we have mentioned, from today onwards, we will be covering both your polity governance paper as well as Indian administration paper. It will be, as I said, in your general studies polity governance and constitution, mostly the theoretical aspects are discussed, but UPSC is not focusing on theoretical aspects. They will not ask you what is Article 41 or Article 42. They are focusing mostly on current analytical aspects. They are focusing on this current analytical aspects. So we will be discussing all of them as part of our classes. Not only the theoretical aspects, but also administrative, governance, political, economic, and social aspects. That is what we will be doing. So to understand about all those things, what is required is, we must understand what happened in the past to understand about what is happening in the present, so that we can predict the future also. Because if you look at the present political system of India, the administrative system of India present, it is nothing but a continuation of what happened in the past, especially from the British times. And we have to look at what happened during the British times and what kind of changes we have made after the British rule. Did we make any real changes or not, or are we continuing with only the political and administrative system that were there during the British times? We have to make an analysis out of it, and then we will see what needs to be done in the present circumstances. What is very important is we must understand why the Britishers had created those structures, what was the objective, and whether those structures have been efficient or not, and what is the impact of those structures. That is what we should be looking at. And to understand what happened in the British times, we must go a little bit back also to what happened during the Mughal times. That also we should be looking at. Let us see today what happened in those times, so that we can come to the present and discuss about our constitution and other aspects of our polity and governance as well as administration. So let us see. So if you look at, let us go back a little bit into pages of history, and let us look at what happened in the 17th and 18th centuries in India. If you look at in 17th century and 18th century, India was the richest country in the world. It was the richest country in the world. India. Akbar at that point of time, even now also, sometime back, some journal in America has carried out the list of top 10 rich men in the world, richest person in the world, right from 5,000 years back till now. And Akbar was there as part of those top 10 richest persons in the world by calculating the income at that point of time and extrapolating it to the present day prices. So Indian empire at that point of time, the Mughal empire, was the most powerful empire in the world at that point of time, and it was the most prosperous also. That is the reason why the Britishers, what do? Whenever they compare the Victorian age, the Victorian age is always compared to the golden age of Mughals, especially Akbar. So why India was called the richest country in the world at that point of time? Our contribution to global trade and global GDP was around 30%. India's contribution to global trade and global GDP was around 30%. Now we say that America is the superpower. Its contribution is around 25%, between 20 and 25%. India's contribution was more than 30% at that point of time. India, along with China, were the most powerful nations in 17th, 18th, and even 19th centuries also. They were the most powerful nations. China's contribution was also almost similar at that point of time, slightly less than India. That is the reason why when you study international relations also, what do we say about when we talk about Indo-China relations? The objective of Indo-China relations is to bring back the 19th century. We should transform a 21st century into 19th century, because in 19th century, India and China combined together had 60% of trade and output. Now that is what they are saying. Of course, in 21st century when you talk about it, 58% China and 2% India, no problem. To bring back the 19th century, that is what at present. So coming back here, when India was the most prosperous country in the world at that point of time, obviously India attracted the attention of the rest of the world. It has attracted the attention of the rest of the world. And the rest of the world wanted to come to India and to trade with India. Why? Because they wanted to prosper by trading with India. And if you look at these European countries, they are all the small countries, UK, small island, and rest of the European countries. And the conditions at that point of time, if you look at 17th and 18th centuries, the conditions were not really good, in the sense that there was no electricity, there were no better transportation and communication facilities. So for European countries to survive, what they needed was, they must focus on trade. That is the reason why from feudalism, if you study in world history, the world had moved away towards what we called mercantilism. Trade used to be the engine of growth. What do? They buy goods from one country and sell it in other countries. Trade was the engine of growth. And if you look at United Kingdom again, at that point of time, it was a small island. Agriculture was also not there. For agriculture, you require good climatic conditions. There was no agriculture. So what did United Kingdom do at that point of time? They had developed, being an island nation, they had no option but to focus on overseas trade. That is the reason why UK developed what we call shipbuilding industries. They focused on these building ships. Big ships were vessels and ships were constructed so that they could trade overseas. And slowly the merchants from UK traveled to other countries around the world, the businessmen, and they started doing the trade with other countries. And they saw the political conditions in those countries, and they divided the people in those countries, and they started ruling those countries. Divide and rule. If you happen to see today's in the newspaper, there was an article about what UK had done in the past had come back to haunt them at the present. UK itself is now divided. It is anything but United Kingdom. It is anything but United Kingdom because of the problems related to Brexit and other things. The country is fully divided, multi-ethnic, multi-racial country. So coming back here, in those days, these merchants, they traveled over to this for trade, and what did they do? They started exploiting the natives, and they started controlling the native population, which resulted in what we call American Revolution also. When the natives of America revolted against British imperialist traders, that resulted in American Revolution. The question that was asked in your world history also 2 years back. So coming back here, obviously, their eyes were set on India also because of the kind of diversity that India had at that point of time. And the problem with India was that India was not a single country. Even though India was the most prosperous nation in the world, China was a single country, but India was not. India was not a single country. So India was divided into so many kingdoms, so many empires. And obviously it is easy because the country is so badly divided. The sense of nationhood was never there at that point of time. When the traders from European countries came here, and initially they restricted themselves to trade, and what did they do? To protect their trading centers, they started constructing forts. And they also started developing their own army. They also had their own army. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the Britishers. They started developing their own army. And the difference was that their army was much more professional than the local kings and other rulers. So what did they do? they used their army, they provided the services of their army to the local kings in the fight between these kings. Slowly they occupied various territories of the country, and they had fight among themselves. They fought among themselves, the British, the French, the Dutch and the Portuguese. Finally the Britishers emerged as victorious. The East India Company emerged as victorious in all those battles. The rest of all these foreign powers were thrown out of the country, and the Britishers had a complete monopoly. So this is what happened at that point of time. And what was the reason why the Britishers could occupy the entire country so easily? As we have mentioned, after 1707, Aurangzeb died, and from 1707 to 1757, the country witnessed a lot of political instability, because the later Mughals who came to power never had the kind of aura or the kind of power that earlier Mughals had exercised. Mughal emperor used to command a lot of respect and fear, but the later Mughals did not have that kind of personalities. Another reason is that if you look at the Mughal empire, their strength also had turned out to be their basic weakness. What was the strength of the Mughal empire? Centralized despotism. That is what we say. Centralized despotism. The emperor had all the powers. Emperor, he had all the powers. He was a despot, dictator, centralized. And all these powers were centralized in the hands of a single person. As long as the emperor was strong, empire was stable. As long as the emperor was strong, empire was stable. So what happened? Aurangzeb, if you look at Aurangzeb, what did he do? He fought so many battles in different places. That is what you study in history also. What was the result? What was the basic reason for the fall of Mughal empire? What you call it as a Deccan ulcer. He fought so many battles in the south of the country, Deccan, and he had spent so much amount of money. On the one hand, he was fighting the Deccan in Hyderabad, and then on the other hand, he was fighting the Marathas, and then he was fighting the Rajputs. He was fighting with these Sikhs also. Almost everywhere he was fighting wars. He wanted to expand the boundaries of his kingdom. And during the tenure of Aurangzeb, the Mughal empire reached its zenith. It reached its maximum levels. It extended from Afghanistan till Myanmar, and from Kashmir till Tamil Nadu. It has extended. But the problem is that with centralized despotism and with absence of better governance systems, obviously it was a recipe for a disaster. When he had fought so many wars, there was no income within the treasury. In those days, the basic source of income for any government was agricultural income tax only, and agriculture was mostly on a sustenance basis. There were not much of technology that was used in agriculture at that point of time. It was only sustenance agriculture. So obviously for all these reasons, what happened was the revenues of the Mughal empire had come down drastically. As we keep on saying, finances are the lifeblood of any organization. And if you look at the army at that point of time, the army of these kings and emperors, they never had any kind of loyalties, in the sense that they were not loyal to the emperor or the king. They would only work for those people who are willing to pay them salaries on a regular basis. Their loyalty is only towards money, but not towards any king or emperor. So when the Mughal emperors after Aurangzeb could not pay the salaries on time, obviously army had shifted their loyalties. They were willing to work for any king, any other institution which is willing to pay them salaries. That is where the Britishers had scored over other kingdoms in India. in most of these princely states and their kingdoms, what happened? Army was never paid regular salaries. On the other hand, what they were asked to collect taxes from the people. Obviously, this is not going to succeed, and it resulted in army committing so many atrocities. People also suffered the most. On the other hand, what did the Britishers do? East India Company. What is the most important reason why East India Company could occupy such a vast continent in such a very easy manner? The most important reason why they could occupy was that their army was completely professional. British, the East India Company, they always paid salaries on time. That resulted in extreme loyalty of the soldiers. They were willing to sacrifice their life for the sake of their kingdoms, for the sake of their company. And if you look at this Battle of Plassey, what happened there? On the one side we had the Nawabs, the Bengal Nawab. On the other side, the East India Company forces. And what were their respective strengths? Nawab had around 25,000 soldiers fighting, and East India Company had around 1,500 soldiers. 1,500 army men defeated 25,000 soldiers in exactly 2 hours time. In army, what really does not matter is the size, the professionalism of the army. It was over in 2-3 hours. And the Bengal Nawab, of course, there was a mutiny within the army also. Most of the army, they did not participate in the war. You must be knowing all these things. Okay. And then what happened is that at that point of time, on the day when the battle took place, it was raining. It was raining. Unfortunately for the Bengal Nawab, it was raining. And the French had given Bengal Nawab this artillery. And if it was not raining at that point of time, India's history would have been completely different. That is what we say, fate. Since it was raining, the Bengal Nawab could not use the French artillery, the heavy guns. He could not use them. And his army was defeated within no time. Had it not rained on that particular day, it could have been different. East India Company forces would have been defeated. India would not have come under the British rule. It's only about these things. The same thing happened in the third battle of Panipat also. The Ahmad Shah Abdali and Marathas. The Marathas were almost winning the battle. Unfortunately, on the day, the third battle took place in the month of January. Panipat, from 100 kilometers from Delhi. And Marathas were fighting from the other side, from the western side. And the horses that they were riding, there was in the month of January there was unusual sun in Delhi and in all these places in North India. January is one of the coldest months. On that day there was a very sharp sun. It blinded the horses. They could not run. And in between Abdali's forces, they came and they conquered the army. Had there not been any sun on that particular day, again India's history would have been completely different. Because Marathas, they had occupied almost the whole of the central India and North India. They marched towards Delhi. They put the Mughal emperor, and then they were ruling the whole of the country, Marathas. And unfortunately, on that particular day, it was bright sunshine. That is the reason why in Maratha language, in Maharashtra, the language, there were old sayings also. It was the sun that blinded Marathas. So coming back here, history is full of these kind of surprises. Our history is full of. It was the nature that really defeated Indians at that point of time. If had Marathas succeeded there, had defeated Ahmad Shah Abdali in the third battle of Panipat, Britishers would never have dared to raise their head. And on the other hand, at the same time, almost at the same time, in the battle of Plassey, they defeated the Bengal Nawab. So coming back here, East India Company was basically a trading company. They came to India for trading purposes. Due to the political stability in the country, due to fight among these trading powers, suddenly they found themselves in a peculiar situation. What was that peculiar situation? They found themselves ruling a vast territory of land, which is much larger than their own country, much larger than their own country. For example, the Nizam province, the area of Nizam province is much larger than the entire United Kingdom. The Bengal province at least 3-4 times than the whole of United Kingdom. And when they occupied the Bengal province, what is this Bengal province consisted of? It consisted of the present day West Bengal, Bihar, Assam, Orissa, Bangladesh. You can imagine. When they occupied this Bengal province, they suddenly found themselves with asking the question, how to administer such a huge province, how to rule such huge province. And we must remember that they were only traders. East India Company was a company that was registered in London Stock Exchange at that point of time. And those who came to India as traders, there were very few Englishmen, a few thousands of Englishmen. That is what they had come. They were accountable to their board of directors in London. You must show profits. If you are a stockholding company, you are accountable to your shareholders in London. And they had to show profits regularly. They had to show profits. Otherwise, the stock prices will fall. The company can get liquidated also. So they had to show profits. And then what happened was, these people who are in India, they tasted political power. From being a trading community, they had become the masters. And they did not want to lose this opportunity to expand the size of the East India Company, the size of their kingdom. And of course, fighting wars at any point of time is a costly affair. They needed finances also. They needed money to fight all these wars. Initially, it was they occupied Bengal province, then they went to southern provinces, from there Marathas. Then they were fighting wars in Afghanistan and along with these Sikhs also. So when they were fighting so many wars almost simultaneously, they needed huge amounts of money. And the amount of revenue they were getting is only mostly land revenues. At that point of time, the major source of revenue was land revenue. And they would impose restrictions on foreign trade, because of which the French, the Dutch and the Portuguese had left the country. The French went eastwards and the Dutch also went eastwards. The Portuguese had completely left except one or two places in India. They had completely left. So when East India Company gained complete monopoly over the trade, as well as got the opportunity to rule the country, that was when they had decided to come out with changes in administrative systems to suit to the conditions in India. From 1757, 1764, this Battle of Buxar was 1764. So from 1764 till 1947, the East India Company came out with East India Company initially, and the British government later came out with so many innovations in administration. And those innovations which they had introduced according to the conditions prevailing in India had become the basis of governance after independence. That is the reason why we should look at what happened at that point of time. All those innovations and all those changes that had made. From 1757 till 1857, it was the company's rule, and from 1857 till 1947, it was the British government directly ruling the country. So what were the changes and how those changes had impacted the present day Indian administration? That is what we will try to see now how they had impacted. So if you look at it, after they occupied this Bengal province, initially they introduced dual rule diarchy in Bengal province. The Bengal Nawab was made responsible for maintenance of law and order and other functions, taking care of the welfare of the people, whereas the Britishers kept with themselves revenue generating powers. Collection of taxes were with the Britishers, whereas the Nawab had all the responsibilities, Britishers had all the powers. They had all the powers. Nawab cannot spend a single rupee because he did not have any money also. Britishers collected all the revenues and kept the revenues with themselves, whereas the Nawab was given the responsibility of ensuring law and order and the welfare of the people. Obviously, this kind of arrangement cannot succeed. This kind of arrangement can never succeed. As we always study, authority and responsibility should always go together. One of the important principles of governance is that authority and responsibility should always go together. A person who has responsibility must also have the authority. Obviously, this arrangement was not successful. It was not successful. Of course, the same arrangement was repeated, after 250 years. UPA government, again foreign powers. History repeats. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. Sonia Gandhi, Italian power, from Britishers to Italians. Okay, she had all the power, and Manmohan Singh had all the responsibility. What is the outcome? 2014 elections, Congress party 44 seats. When you don't follow the principles of governance, that is what exactly happens. And for how long this arrangement lasted? The arrangement between the Bengal Nawab and the East India Company. How many years? When did Battle of Plassey take place? 1757, and Battle of Buxar 64. 7 years it had lasted, and UPA arrangement lasted for 10 years. That is what happens. It cannot be more than that. It lasted for 10 years because Manmohan Singh cannot revolt and will not revolt, cannot think of revolting also. It is the people who have revolted, not Manmohan Singh. Okay, people who have revolted against this kind of arrangement. At that point of time, Bengal Nawab had some kind of self-esteem. I am not saying that Manmohan Singh does not have it. Self-esteem. To have it, you should know what it is. What is it also? Manmohan Singh did not know what is self-esteem also. In 1987, Manmohan Singh was the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission, and Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. Rajiv Gandhi, in a press conference, he called the Planning Commission members a bunch of jokers. Rest of all the Planning Commission members resigned, but not Manmohan Singh. Okay, so Manmohan Singh is made up of a thick skin. See, obviously in politics, if you talk about self-esteem, what happens? You will not be able to achieve greater heights. And that is what we will talk about all these people as we proceed. Why this administration and polity and these things are very, very interesting is because we will talk about all these personalities. We will talk about Jawaharlal Nehru. We restrict ourselves only to governance issues, not his private affairs. If we have to talk about his private affairs, we will have to continue classes for at least 2-3 years. Okay, so we will restrict ourselves. Similarly, same is the case with Indira Gandhi. Okay, we will only talk about what was the problem with her government, not with her personal life. Again, if we have to discuss it, it will take a lot of time for us. So coming back, there is nothing to talk about Rahul Gandhi. Okay, don't expect me. Don't expect to talk about Rahul Gandhi. So coming back here, what happened was that so the Bengal Nawab revolted, and Britishers ended this arrangement in Bengal province. Suddenly they found themselves ruling such a vast territory of land, And on the other hand, this court of board of control that was there in London, they were demanding accountability from this board of directors in India of East India Company. They were saying that to show the profits, and this board of directors were clearly told that they should not fight any wars. East India Company should always remain a trading company, and they should not have any political ambitions. That is what they were clearly informed. Why? Because the profits were coming down because of the wars that were fought by East India Company. So the board of directors who were staying in India at that point of time, they had already tasted political power. They did not want to stop fighting the wars. They had to come out with something new to increase their revenues so that they could show profits to their bosses sitting in London. They could show profits, and that is the reason why they introduced, as we have said, so many changes. You cannot call them as reforms. They introduced so many changes. In the Bengal province, what they have done, they had introduced Jamindari system. They had introduced Jamindari system. What is this Jamindari system? Jamindari system, what is it? Jami means land. Jamindari means owner. So normally, in those days, the farmer was the owner of the land. Farmer was the owner of the land. So what did the Britishers, East India Company do? They had grouped a number of villages, around 50-20 villages, 30-40 villages. They were grouped together. They had given this responsibility of collecting revenue from these villages to a person. They said that you must collect revenues, land revenues, to a person. That person was called Jamindar. He was a collection agent of East India Company, and the land revenue was fixed by the directors of the company, so that they get a fixed income every year, irrespective of whether the farmers were producing it or not. Why? Because there was a lot of pressure on the board of directors in India to show profits. So what they have done as part of this system, Jamindari system, the entire province of Bengal was divided into small units of 30-40 villages. And how did they divide? They conducted a scientific survey regarding the fertility of the soil, regarding the output of that particular land. On the basis of that, they fixed the land revenues, whether it is the British rule or the this Mughal rule. The land revenue was only the source of revenue for the governments. Agricultural income tax, land revenue, it is used to vary between 1/4 to 1/3. That means 25% to 33% of the output. In those days, there was no GST. Otherwise, Britishers would have consulted the GST Council also. Okay. So the only source of revenue was 25% to 33%, and Britishers wanted to maximize the revenue. That is the reason why they had divided them. The Bengal province was divided into what we call them as revenue districts. The entire province was divided into revenue districts on the basis of the revenue potential of that particular area. It was divided into revenue districts on the basis of the revenue potential, and they had appointed one person to collect the revenue, and that person was called the collector of revenue. That person was called the collector of revenue. What we call them as at present the district collector. The office of district collector had its origins in the East India Company. Collector means collector of revenue. Collector of revenue. What we call them as the district collector. So, and this district collector would appoint jamindars. And these jamindars were given the responsibility to collect revenue on behalf of the East India Company. And the revenue will be fixed by the East India Company. How much amount of revenue they must be collecting. It is fixed by the East India Company on the basis of, as we have said, the scientific survey done by the East India Company officials. And for collecting this revenue, the jamindar was given a certain percentage of profits. For example, 12/13 of the revenue will be going to the East India Company and 1/13 will be going to the jamindar for collecting the revenue. For collecting the revenue. Jamindar would be getting around 1/13. Means what is the percentage? Around 8%, around 7.5 to 8%. Okay, that is what the jamindar would be getting. And what is the arrangement here? Jamindar, the amount of revenue he has to collect is fixed. For example, from the 40 villages that are under his control, he should be paying the East India Company around, say, 1 lakh rupees. 1 lakh rupees, he should be paying 1 lakh rupees. Irrespective of whether that particular year the output is there or not. For example, in case of a drought or a famine situation, farmers won't be able to pay the taxes. Farmers won't be able to pay the taxes because there is no output. Farmers won't be able to pay. Whether the farmers are paying or not, whether the farmers are paying the tax or not, jamindar must pay the tax. Every year, it is the responsibility of the jamindar to pay the taxes to the East India Company, irrespective of whether farmers are paying it or not. And what happened? This East India Company had given powers to these jamindars to confiscate the land of those farmers who do not pay the revenues and pay taxes on behalf of those farmers. Farmers can have ownership's rights over the land only for as long as they paid the taxes regularly. Under normal monsoon conditions, they would pay the taxes. The problems would come up only when under drought and famine conditions. What happened because of this? Over a period of time, jamindars had confiscated the entire land of farmers. Farmers had become tillers in their own land. That is how this jamindari system had become so exploitative in nature. It had become so exploitative in nature. And that is the reason why, if you look at the present agriculture in India, almost 89% of farmers own less than 2% of land, and 2% of farmers own 90% of land because of these kind of exploitative land revenue systems that were introduced by the Britishers. So this is what happened. So this is what the Britishers had done to maximize their revenues, and slowly they were expected to perform other functions. So the British, as long as the British rule was there in India, British rule had two important objectives. It had two important objectives. What were the objectives of the British rule? To maximize revenues. That is what a colony is supposed to do. A colony is supposed to work for the interests of the imperial state. A colony is supposed to work for the interests of the imperial state. India was a colony of the Britishers. India did not have any independent existence. So, to maximize revenues for the British Empire, that is what they were expected to do. So the British administration, colonial administration in India had this important objective. Second one is to continue British rule in India for as long as possible, almost forever. To continue British rule in India for as long as possible. Why? Because Britishers never wanted to lose control over the India. India was the golden duck for the Britishers. So they never wanted. Even after Second World War was over, Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of UK at that point of time, never wanted to give freedom to India. A true imperialist. He said that even if we get destroyed, we should not lose control over our colonies. Churchill. That is the reason why when Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister during the Second World War, he was doing so many things except assuring the Indians that after the Second World War, India would be getting freedom. And India got freedom because after the war was over, Britishers had defeated Conservative Party and voted for Labour Party. Attlee became the Prime Minister. He was always in favor of giving freedom to the country. India got freedom. So these two were the important objectives of the British rule in India. One, to maximize the revenues, and second, to continue British rule in India for as long as possible. So whatever the changes they had introduced in India, were only to achieve these objectives. So what did the Britishers do? What kind of changes they had introduced? Let us see. What did they introduce? From 1773 onwards, they had passed the regulating acts. The British Parliament passed the regulating acts. Regulating acts after every 20 years. They had passed the regulating acts after every 20 years. So 1773, 1793, then 1813, 1833, and finally 1853. After every 20 years, the British Parliament had passed the regulating acts. After every 20 years, it had passed the regulating acts. After every 20 years. What was the objective of these regulating acts? To control the activities of East India Company. To control the activities of East India Company. You must remember that in your prelims examination, at least every year, 2-3 questions will be about these regulating acts. They keep on asking every year. Nowadays, this year they have asked only one question, I think. Otherwise, every year they will ask about 2-3 questions from these regulating acts. So it had passed these regulating acts from 1773 till 1853. Then 1857 the war took place, and from 1858 onwards, after the 1857 war, East India Company's political power had come to an end. India went directly into the hands of the British Crown, from the British Crown. From 1858 onwards, it was the British Parliament that was passing legislations for India. After that, 1861, Indian Councils Act was passed. 1861, Indian Councils Act was passed. Then, after that, 1892. What is it? Indian Councils Act. One more Indian Councils Act was passed, 1892. Then 1909. What are they? 1909. What were they called? Morley Minto reforms, not even reforms, changes only. 1909. Then 1919 Government of India Act. 1919 Government of India Act. And later 1935 Government of India Act. 1935 Government of India Act. And finally, last but not the least, 1947 Indian Independence Act. Indian Independence Act was passed by the British Parliament. Finally, the Indian Independence Act was passed by the British Parliament. The content of all these legislations will be part of your prelims polity. It will be part of your prelims polity. The content of all these legislations. From the mains perspective, especially both our Indian administration and political governance, from mains perspective, what we will be looking at is the analysis of British rule in India. How it has changed. What is the impact of British rule on Indian administration? Let us try to look at these things. What is the impact of British rule? Why? Because, as I said, unless we understand how the Britishers had created the institutions and used all these institutions, we cannot understand what is happening in India at this point of time. So where do we see the impact of British rule? What are the things that they had introduced in India? What did they introduce? Let us see. First, they introduced the concept of rule of law. First, they introduced the impact of British rule. Impact of British rule on Indian administration. Impact of British rule on Indian administration. First, as we are saying, first what they had done, they introduced the concept of rule of law. Then they introduced independent judiciary. Independent judiciary. Third, they introduced federal form of government. Federal form of government. Fourth, they introduced parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary democracy. Fifth, they introduced the civil services which we have at this point of time. Civil services. They introduced civil services. Next, they also introduced the present district administration we have. District administration. Next, local self-governments. Local self-governments. Lord Ripon, we call him as the father of local self-governments in India. Next, they also introduced Secretariat Administration. They also introduced Secretariat Administration. Secretariat Administration. What we have at present, Cabinet Secretariat, Central Secretariat, and PMO, all those are nothing but the replicas of the British administration. Next, they also introduced the budgets and other financial systems. budgets and other financial systems. For example, Public Accounts Committee, auditing, CAG, all of them, were part of a British administration. They introduced these things, budget and other, financial systems they introduced. So this is what the Britishers had done in their 200 years rule in India. You must remember that when the Britishers had introduced all these things, their objective was not to maximize welfare of people. What was their objective? To maximize the revenues. Second, to continue British rule in India almost on a permanent basis. So this is what they have done. Let us see all these things in a detailed manner. In fact, this is nothing but the entire syllabus of our both general studies as well as Indian administration. This is nothing but the entire syllabus. If you look at the syllabus, this is what the syllabus is all about. So first one is the rule of law. What is this rule of law? What is this rule of law? The essence of rule of law is equality before law. It is equality before law. The essence of rule of law is equality before law. Before the Britishers, we never had this concept of rule of law. Before the Britishers entered into the country, we never had the concept of rule of law. Why? Because we had only dictatorship. In dictatorial regimes, there is no rule of law. Why? Because whatever the emperor, whatever the king would say would be rule of law. Whatever the king say would be the law. King had all these powers. What are the powers? King had legislative powers, executive powers, as well as judicial powers. That is what we call dictatorship. In dictatorship, all the powers are concentrated in the hands of one person. All the powers were concentrated in the hands of one single person. And India never had experienced true democracy or rule of law for almost 5,000 years. This concept of democracy and rule of law is a modern concept. It was not there in earlier times. It was not there in earlier times. It was a modern concept. It was developed in UK, and later they introduced it in India also. So, but again, if you look at it here, what the Britishers introduced in India was different from what they had in their own country. That is what we must remember here. They did not put whatever they had in their country in India in a blind manner. India was not a sovereign nation. It was a colony. So obviously colony subjects will not enjoy the same kind of rights as the citizens of the imperial state. So when they introduced rule of law, it was only introduced in a very preliminary form. It was not there completely. So people were never equal during the British regime. Indians were never treated as equal. They were never treated as equal. In fact, Indians understood more about rule of law when they visited UK. The kind of rights and the freedoms the people of UK enjoyed in their own country, in Great Britain, and Indians never had those kind of freedoms. The reason why the freedom movement started was when people from India traveled to United Kingdom. When they traveled to United Kingdom, they saw the kind of freedoms and rights that the Britishers enjoyed, and they started asking the question, why can't we also have the same kind of rights and freedoms? That was the origin of freedom movement in India. They saw the kind of the society that the UK had at that point of time. Even though Britishers introduced this rule of law, it was neither in letter nor in spirit. At least in the present day India, we have rule of law in letter. During the British times, it was not there either in letter or in spirit. We came to know about it mostly from the Britishers' rule in their own country. We came to know about rule of law mostly from the Britishers in their own country than what they had introduced in India. In India, they introduced the basic rule of law. What did they do? They replaced, during the Mughal times, what was the administration? During the Mughal times, administration was based on Shariat, Islam personal laws. And what did the Britishers do? They introduced secular rational administration in India. As part of rule of law, they introduced secular and rational administration. They delinked religion from administration. That is what they had done, delinking religion from administration. Second one is they introduced judiciary as part of rule of law. The essence of rule of law, as we have said, is separation of powers between legislature, executive and judiciary. The essence of rule of law is separation of powers between legislature, executive and judiciary. Legislature is responsible for formulating laws, rules and regulations, executive for implementing them and judiciary for interpretation. That is what we say. Legislature for formulating, executive for implementing and judiciary for interpreting, review. So, to perform this function, Britishers introduced executive for implementing and judiciary for interpretation. To perform these functions, Britishers came out with independent judiciary. They had come out with an institution called judiciary. Earlier judicial functions were also performed by the king, emperor, and earlier judicial functions were mostly performed by religious heads. They were the ones who interpreted the religious traditions and customs. Now this function is being given to judiciary. If you look at the freedom movement in India, most of the leaders of the freedom movement were lawyers only. Most of them were lawyers only. So that judicial profession was very attractive during those times. The law profession, legal profession was very, very attractive during those times. So coming back here, if you look at the British rule in India, what do we say? We say that judiciary during the British times was neither independent nor impartial. It was neither independent nor impartial. During the British times, it was neither independent nor impartial. It was not independent because, why it was not independent? Because the Viceroy or Governor General can always veto the decisions of the Supreme Court. Viceroy or Governor General can always veto the decisions of the Supreme Court. Can veto the decisions of the Supreme Court. It was not independent. It was not impartial. Why it was not impartial? Because Indian judges were not allowed Indian judges were not allowed to pronounce judgments in cases involving Europeans and Britishers. Indian judges were not allowed to pronounce judgments in cases involving Europeans and Britishers. They were not allowed to pronounce judgments in cases involving Europeans and Britishers. Even though they introduced judiciary, it was neither independent nor impartial. Next, they introduced a federal form of government. Britishers introduced a federal form of government. What did they do as part of this federal form of government? What did they do? Britishers had realized that India being such a vast country, it cannot be governed from a single place. That is what they had realized during their early experience in India. India is such a big country, vast country, it cannot be governed from a single place. They had realized the fact that administrative decentralization is necessary. They had realized the fact that administrative decentralization is necessary to improve efficiency of administration. Administrative decentralization is necessary to improve efficiency of administration. It is necessary to improve the efficiency of administration. Administrative decentralization is necessary. That is the reason why the country was divided into provinces. Administrative decentralization is necessary to improve efficiency of administration. That's why what did they do? They divided the country into various provinces. What were the provinces that were there at that point of time? The Bengal province was there, then Madras, then Bombay, then United Province, then northern provinces. Like this, they had divided the country. They had introduced, they had divided the country into various provinces. Then what did they do? The governor of Bengal province was declared as the Governor General of the entire country also. Governor of Bengal province was made the Governor General of the entire country. Under which regulating act? (1793), 1813, 2052, 93, 1993. Okay. I will keep on asking these kind of questions and find out answers to them. Okay, because this is what they will be asking in your prelims. These are the questions they are asking. Find out the answer and tell me tomorrow. Okay. So coming back here, that is what they have done. They divided country into various provinces. Then what did they do? 1935 Government of India Act had for the first time introduced true federalism in India. 1935 Government of India Act. It had introduced federalism in India. Federal form of government. 1935 Government of India Act introduced a federal form of government in India. How? It had come out with a union list, state list and concurrent list. Union list, state list and concurrent list. To divide the powers between the federal units. To divide powers between the federal units. to divide powers between the federal units. 1935 Government of India Act. And after independence, we continued with the same arrangement. They introduced federal form of government. Even though it was federal form of government, India was completely a unitary state only. India was completely a unitary state, even though it was federal form of government, because the Governor General or the Viceroy had absolute powers. The Governor General or the Viceroy had absolute powers. It was only a unitary state. They had absolute powers. Governor General or Viceroy had absolute powers. So this is what they had introduced. After independence, we made changes. What are the changes? We will study again as part of center-state relations. We will study them. After federal form of government, the next they introduce is they introduce all of them simultaneously, but we are going one by one. Next one is parliamentary form of government. Parliamentary form of democracy they had introduced. It was 1853. It was 1853 Regulating Act. 1853 Regulating Act that introduced parliamentary form of government in India. (1853) Regulating Act that introduced parliamentary form of government in India. What happened with 1853 Regulating Act? It had separated the powers of legislature and executive. It had separated the powers of legislature and executive. For the first time, legislative and executive powers were separated for the first time. Then from then onwards, slowly parliamentary democracy was introduced. Then what happened after that? Slowly in administration, legislature and executive functions were slowly as over a period of time. Then what happened? 1892 Indian Councils Act. What did 1892 Indian Councils Act do? It had given representation for Indians in legislative councils. It had given representation for Indians. 1892. It had given representation for Indians in legislative councils. Why? Because it had given representation for Indians in legislative councils for the first time. For the first time, Indians were given representation. Why? Because 1885 Congress Party was formed. 1885 Congress Party came into existence. When Congress had come into existence in 1885, what was the demand of Congress Party? They were not seeking independence or sovereignty. Their demand was that why should only Britishers exploit India? Indians should also be given opportunity. Very noble intention. Okay. From 1885 till 2018, Congress Party had the same objective. Okay. Why should only Britishers exploit the country? 1885 Congress Party was headed by foreigner. 2018 again foreigner. Okay. That is what we study in history. The more the things change, the more they remain the same. Nothing has changed for Congress Party. Okay. Diarchy, it was there. Okay. Now also diarchy is there. Rahul Gandhi is the president and the real powers are with Sonia Gandhi. Okay. and 1885 it was foreigner. Now one more foreigner, except that Sonia Gandhi's name is not there in NPR, National Population Register, from Assam. Okay. Otherwise, today newspapers you have seen the front page headlines. 40 lakh names were not there in the register. If their names are not there, then they are not considered as citizens of the country. When they are not citizens of the country, what is the difference between citizens and others? Not every citizen has all the fundamental rights. There are certain fundamental rights which are only reserved for the citizens of the country. Rest of the people in the country do not have all the fundamental rights. They cannot vote in elections. They cannot get the benefits of welfare and developmental schemes. So coming back here, when the Britishers introduced this parliamentary form of government, it was introduced over a period of time. 1892, in the Indian Councils Act, for the first time Indians were given representation to participate and discuss, but they cannot vote. They cannot vote. They can participate, they can discuss, they can debate the legislations, the bills introduced in the Legislative Council, but they cannot vote. And Indians to the Legislative Council were nominated only by the British government. They were not elected by the people also. They were only nominated by the British government. They were only nominated by the British government. They were not elected. And whom did the Britishers nominate? The leaders of the princely states were nominated as members of Legislative Council. Princely states, the leaders, the kings and the princes were nominated to Legislative Council. Obviously, it did not satisfy Congress party. They wanted other Indians also to be part of legislative process. That was the reason why in 1909 the reforms were introduced. 1909. What happened in 1909? Two things. First, they expanded the size of Legislative Council. Second, elections were held to Legislative Council, and other Indians were given the opportunity to contest elections. It was not restricted to only princely state members. Elections were held, and those who elected could become members of Legislative Council from people, from nomination to election. Again, otherwise the administrative arrangement is the same. What is it? They can discuss and debate, but they cannot vote. They can discuss and debate, they cannot vote. And what is the objective? What did the Britishers say? They wanted Indians to have a responsible government. They wanted to teach Indians about democracy. That is the reason why they said that they were introducing these changes in a very slow and steady manner, so that Indians can get used to democracy. That is what they said. Then obviously it did not satisfy Congress party, and then what happened? From 1916 onwards, there was a change in the Congress party leadership. Mahatma Gandhi, he became the leader of the Congress party. Moderates in Congress party were on the decline. Extremists were on the rise, and they were making other demands, like at least giving dominion status to India, giving Indians complete freedom to rule their country. Obviously, again the Britishers played their dirty tricks. They came out with the 1919 Government of India Act. What is the essence of 1919 Government of India Act? What did they do? As part of evolution of parliamentary democracy, in 1919 Government of India Act, what did they do? what did they do? They expanded the scope of parliamentary democracy. Indians were given representation in executive also. Earlier they were only restricted to legislature. They were given representation in executive also. And diarchy was introduced in the provinces. Diarchy, it was introduced in the provinces. Diarchy was introduced in provinces. This diarchy was introduced in provinces. And when they introduced diarchy, what is it? What is this diarchy? In provinces, the subjects of the government were divided into two categories: transferred subjects and reserved subjects. The activities of the government were divided into two categories: transferred subjects and reserved subjects. And the reserved subjects were completely in the hands of the Britishers. They were out of bounds for Indians. What were reserved subjects? Security, finances, and defense, and other things. Everything was part of reserved subjects. Anything that is critical for British survival in India was part of reserved subjects. Part of reserved subjects. And what were the subjects that were transferred to Indians, Indian ministers? Sanitation, rural development, urban development, little bit of education, little bit of health. They were transferred to Indians. Basically, the objective is to pacify the Congress party and the freedom movement. Obviously, in Congress party, there was a lot of disagreement over this 1919 Government of India Act. Some of the people wanted to join the government and create problems for the British administration by being within the government, whereas most of others in the Congress party wanted to boycott the government. They did not want to contest elections. Why? Because this 1995 Government of India Act was nothing but a complete eyewash. Britishers never really transferred. What they said as part of this 1990 Government of India Act was that, of course, in case of reserved subjects, Indians had absolutely no role to play. Even in case of transferred subjects also, which had Indian ministers, the ultimate power lies with the bureaucracy. The secretary in that particular department can veto the decisions of the minister. Secretary had absolute veto powers. He can veto the decisions of the minister without giving any explanation also. These ICS officers had a huge amount of powers. ICS officers, they can veto the decisions of the ministers. Obviously, this arrangement did not satisfy the freedom fighters. Some of them wanted to contest elections and participate in governance. They were called pro-changes in Congress party, and rest of them were no changes, Motilal Nehru and others. So the elections were held and they became ministers at the provincial level. Within a short period of time, they realized the fact that Britishers were playing a dirty game with them. They never had any real powers. And immediately what did they do? They resigned. And after that, again, the agitation was started. And what did the British government do? They had sent a Simon Commission to discuss about the transfer of power to India, to give dominion status or how to transfer power to India. Again, that is what we study. What we say is that when the government does not want to commit itself, it committees it. So committees and commissions are basically appointed with the objective of delaying the decisions. Britishers perfected this art. Whenever Congress party would start an agitation, they would appoint a committee or commission. They will say that the committee will look into the problems, demands of Congress party, it will discuss them, it will analyze, it will submit the report. On the basis of the report, we will take a decision. The committee will be given at least 200-300 years time to submit the report. So Simon Commission was appointed, it was boycotted by India because Simon Commission did not have a single member from India. So obviously it was boycotted. Then Gandhi started this Dandi March, and finally, the second round table conference Gandhi attended, and after that the Britishers came out with this 1935 Government of India Act. And what did they do as part of this 1935 Government of India Act? What did they do? They introduced, as we have said, federal form of government, and they also abolished the diarchy in provinces and introduced at the central level. It was never implemented. It was never implemented. Diarchy was never implemented at the central level. And they had come out with various institutions also as part of 1935 Government of India Act. What are the most important institutions that had come into existence as part of 1935 Government of India Act? Supreme Court. First one was the Supreme Court, then RBI, Reserve Bank of India, Federal Reserve Bank at that point of time, Federal Bank of India at that point of time. Then FPSC, Federal Public Service Commission, which was later renamed as UPSC. So these institutions had come into existence as part of 1935 Government of India Act. And then elections were held in 1937. Congress party came to power in the provinces as well as at the central level. And when the Second World War started in 1939, what happened? The British government announced the participation of India in the Second World War without consulting the ministers. So the ministers had resigned, and Gandhi started Quit India movement. Once the war had ended, the British government started the process of transferring power to India, which was completed in 1947. This was what we call the whole history of constitutional governance in India, that started with 1853 and ended with 1947 Indian Independence Act. So when you look at the British parliamentary democracy in India, they did not introduce completely the parliamentary democracy. It was never there in the whole of the British rule in India. Parliamentary democracy was only introduced in letter but never in spirit. Parliament was never given sufficient powers, and all the decisions were taken by the Governor General. Parliament was there, it never had any real powers. Next important thing that we talk about here is, after parliamentary democracy, they introduced civil services in India. The next important thing we have to talk about is civil services in India. What did they do as part of civil services in India? So what happened, as we have said, the East India Company was there, and East India Company, the objective was to maximize revenues from the country. When they came out with this position of collectors, the district collector, who were appointed as collectors, it was mostly spoils system. That means mostly the relatives of the directors in London, they were appointed as collectors. Relatives of the directors in London were appointed as collectors. It was what we call the spoils system, S-P-O-I-L-S, spoils system. The relatives of the directors were appointed as collectors. And what happened? Since they did not possess any technical knowledge of administration, they were not successful. Because administration is a technical activity. And they did not possess any skills in administration. They did not possess any skills needed for administration. So it impacted the revenues of East India Company. It impacted the revenues of East India Company. They could not maximize the revenues. Then the East India Company realized that they needed a technically qualified personnel. They needed a technically qualified personnel to head these crucial positions. To head these crucial positions. These crucial positions. Then what did they do? They started recruiting people. East India Company started recruiting people on the basis of merit through open competitive examinations. They started recruiting people on the basis of merit through open competitive examinations. Through open competitive examinations. Through open competitive examinations. So they introduced modern civil services in India. They introduced this modern MODERN civil services in India. So the civil services in India at that point of time were divided into two categories. Civil services were divided into two categories. They were divided into two categories broadly. What are they? First one is covenanted, COVENANTED, covenanted civil services. Second one is non-covenanted civil service. Non. What is the meaning of the word covenant? COVENANT. What is the meaning of the word covenant in English? It means an agreement. It means agreement. Covenanted civil services means there was an agreement between the employer and the employee. Agreement between the employer and employee. Agreement between the employer and employee. The employer here is East India Company and the employees are the civil servants. What you call them at that point of time? Company servants, civil servants. What was the agreement related to? Agreement was related to the conditions of service, salary, promotions, pension and other things. Conditions of service, salary, promotions, discipline, pensions, post-retirement benefits and so on. And so on. The agreement was between the East India Company and the civil servants, company servants. The agreement was related to these things. So what East India Company wanted? East India Company wanted the best of the talent in the world to work in India. The best of the talent in the world to work in India. That is the reason why in those days Indian civil services were considered the most efficient civil service in the world, better than the civil services that the Britishers had there in their own country also. They wanted to attract the best of the talent. When can you attract the best of the talent? Only when you give attractive service conditions in terms of salary, pensions and other packages. They wanted to attract the best of the talent. In those days, we are talking about 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, at that point of time, 250 years back, more than that. In those days, what do we say? In those days, when the Europeans and the British, they wanted to work in India, they would put a lot of conditions. Why? Because look at India and look at UK at that point of time. Culture was completely different, religion different, language different, climatic conditions different, food habits different, everything is different. For example, a person from North England, which is extremely cold and chilly weather, coming and working in Madras province, extremely hot and humid. Why would he come all the way from North England to work in Madras province? Unless he gets attractive remuneration. He should be getting remuneration which is much higher than what he was getting in his own country. So what they used to demand is that the first condition of these company civil servants was that they should be paid their salaries only in Indian rupees, not British pounds. In those days, Indian rupee was the strongest currency in the world. Our rupee was the strongest currency in the world. Right now, what is 1 pound and rupee exchange rate? 1 pound equal to 89 rupees, 88, 89 rupees, 90 rupees. In those days, 1 rupee equal to 100 pounds. Can you imagine? 1 rupee equal to 100 pounds. And they would say that Indians should be these officers, civil servants demanded that they should be paid only in Indian rupees, not in British pounds. And they demanded a minimum salary of 500 rupees per month. In those days, 500 rupees per month means at present equal to the salary of Mukesh Ambani. What is salary of Mukesh Ambani? That Reliance Industries Limited pays. What is salary of Mukesh Ambani? 10 crores. That is only the basic salary. Otherwise, he will be given so many other benefits also. 10 crores. Annual salary. 10 crores. So in those days, they would demand these things. And the East India Company had agreed them to pay in Indian rupees, 500 rupees. And what are the other service conditions that they were given? They don't have to work in India for a very long period of time. If they work in India for say 10 years, that was more than enough. They can go back to UK and work there, and they will be paid pension for the rest of their lifetime for working only for 10 years. They were paid pension also. Again, the objective is to attract the best of the talent. Covenanted civil services. Top services were what we call covenanted civil services. The agreement was there. Then the other one is non-covenanted civil services. Non-covenant means there was no agreement between the employer and employee. And for these non-covenanted civil services, Indians were given opportunity to work in these non-covenanted civil services. East India Company required a huge army of clerks to work with the East India Company. Clerk and other jobs, cooks, then gardeners, servants, they were part of non-covenanted civil services. There was no agreement between East India Company and these employees. They can be removed at any point of time without giving any explanation also. Their salaries were also very less. There was no pension also. That is what we called non-covenanted civil services. So they introduced as part of civil services in India, covenanted and non-covenanted civil services. Later, after some point of time, they had abolished this system. They introduced a new system. What is it? In place of covenanted and non-covenanted civil services, they had come out with another new system with 3 different services. 3 different services. First one is All India Services. All India Services. What were All India Services? ICS and IPS. Indian Civil Service and Indian Police Service. IPS, nobody knows exactly when IPS came into existence. It was around 1910 for the first time this rank of IPS was introduced. 1910, ICS and IPS. That was the first All India service. Second one is Provincial Civil Services. Second one is Provincial Civil Services. Provincial Civil Services. What were these Provincial Civil Services? Like what we have at present, state services. At the state level you have Group A, Group B, Group 1, Group 2 services, Provincial services. The third one they introduced was subordinate services. Subordinate services. Subordinate services means this Group 3 and Group 4 services. Peons, gardeners, cooks, all these what we call subordinate services, clerks, all of them. That is what they had introduced. And the examination for All India services, they were conducted in London. The examinations were conducted in London, and it was considered the toughest examination in the world at that point of time. Toughest competitive examination in the world. The civil service examination was the toughest examination in the world at that point of time. The question paper was set by professors from Oxford and Cambridge universities, not Patna University. Okay, Oxford and Cambridge universities. The question paper was set. They were tested in all things. They were tested in polity, economy, philosophy, psychology, administration. Only graduates from Oxford and Cambridge universities could clear this examination. Very, very tough. Not from graduates from Patna University. Graduates from Patna University, what do? They only join politics and become chief ministers. Lalu Prasad Yadav. Okay. In those days, they were very tough because Britishers wanted the most intelligent people to be there in civil services. The examination process was very tough. Then what happened? Initially only Europeans and Britishers were allowed to take this examination. Later Indians were also allowed to take the examination. Even the Indians were allowed, the representation of Indians was very less. Why? Because the age limit was 19 years. 19 years age limit to take the examination. 19 years, and they had to go to London to take the examination, and take the examination, which was very tough. So obviously it was almost impossible for Indians to clear the examination. Then they increased the age limit to 21 years, and 21 years was the maximum age to take the examination. 21 years. That was the maximum age limit to take the examination. Now we have, what is the age limit? At the state level, especially for Group A, Group B services at the state level, in recruitment age is around 80 years, retirement age is 60 years. Retirement age is 60 years. Recruitment, there is no limit. Okay, there is no limit. Every state government has increased the recruitment. In some of the states it is 45 years also. You get into services, next day you will retire also. So that is what we do. In those days, 21 years was the upper age limit to take the examination. Then what happened? Again Congress party agitated, saying that we should also exploit the country. And Britishers have accepted it, and the examinations were conducted simultaneously in India also. FPSC, Federal Public Service Commission, came into existence to conduct examinations in India also. FPSC, Federal Public Service Commission, it had come into existence to conduct examinations in India also. and after independence FPSC was renamed as UPSC. UPSC. It was renamed as UPSC. After independence, we made so many changes to the examination process, which we shall be studying later. So this is what they had introduced. Civil services. Next major change that the Britishers introduced in India was the district administration. District administration. The next major change that they had introduced, the district administration. As part of the district administration, what do we say? Before Britishers were there in India, what kind of administration was there in the Mughal provinces? In the Mughal administration, at the top you had the emperor, who had absolute powers. In the Mughal administration, at the top, he had emperor who had absolute powers, and he had the support of the council of ministers. Support of the council of ministers. Then the empire was divided into various provinces. Empire was divided into various provinces. At present, what we call them as the states. It was divided into various provinces. Each province was headed by a governor. It was headed by a governor. Who were appointed as governors? Normally, the sons of the emperor were appointed as governors. Sons. For example, Aurangzeb was the governor of Bengal province, Deccan province. Aurangzeb was the governor of Deccan province. He was the governor of Deccan province. The sons of the emperor were appointed as governors. And provinces were further divided into military districts. The provinces were further divided into military districts. These provinces were further divided into military districts. And they were known as subhas. S-U-B-H-A-S, subhas. Military districts. And these districts were headed by munsabdars. They were headed by munsabdars. Munsabdars. They are headed by munsabdars. Again, they were appointed by the governor. These munsabdars were appointed by the governor. They were appointed by the governor. In your prelims, these kind of questions are routinely asked. All these questions are routinely asked in your prelims. Part of history. You cannot say that they were discussed in our polity classes, so we will not answer them. Okay. So you have to answer any other questions. Okay. So, and then what was so special about these military districts? These munsabdars had all the powers unto themselves. They had legislative powers, they had executive powers, they also had judicial powers. They had legislative powers, they had executive powers, they also had judicial powers. Legislative, executive and judicial powers. Not only that, they maintained their own army. They maintained their own army. What they are expected to do? They must collect land revenue. They are expected to collect land revenue and keep a certain portion with them to maintain army. And keep a certain portion to maintain army. Rest of the money would be sent to the governor, and governor would send it back to the emperor. Rest of the money would be sent to the governor, and the governor would send it back to the emperor. That is the administrative and financial arrangement during the Mughal times. And not only that, these Mansabdars, they are expected to provide the services of the army to the emperor as and when the emperor demanded it. They are expected to provide the services of their army to the emperor. They are expected to provide the services of their army to the emperor as and when the emperor demanded. So, when the Mughals were fighting all these wars, who fought all these wars? The emperor had his own set of army, but more importantly, the army maintained by these Mansabdars always came to the help of the emperor. That is the reason why, if you look at Mughal Empire, maximum wars were fought by Rajputs, on behalf of the Mughal emperor, Rajputs. For example, if you look at Shivaji, Shivaji army was headed by a Muslim, whereas Aurangzeb army was headed by a Hindu. So much for Hindu versus Muslim conflicts. Because Rajputs were the ones who were extremely powerful as part of the Mughal Empire, and the emperor would give them all kinds of facilities. They were asked to maintain their army, they were asked to collect their revenues, they were asked to dispense justice, they were asked to legislate for those areas. They had absolute powers. And what happened? This is one of the most important reasons for the downfall of Mughal Empire. Why? Because these Mansabdars and the governors were loyal to the emperor as long as the emperor was strong. They knew that if they had revolted, emperor would punish them severely. They had revolted. That is the reason why they had more fear than respect for the emperor. What happened after the death of Aurangzeb in 1707? The later Mughals did not command the same kind of fear. And all these provincial governors as well as these Mansabdars declared independence. Why? Because for all practical purposes they were independent. For all practical purposes. They had maintained their own army. They had their own legal system. They had their own judicial system and everything. So they declared independence. That resulted in the disintegration of the Mughal Empire. That is why we say that the strength of the Mughal Empire has turned out to be its major weakness also. What was the strength of Mughal Empire? Centralized despotism. It was their major weakness also. Why? Because when the Mughal Emperor had become weak, it immediately resulted in the disintegration of the Mughal Empire. How long did it take for the disintegration of Mughal Empire? 50 years. By 1757, there was no Mughal Empire as such. By 1757. By 1857, the rule of the Mughal Emperor was restricted to only Red Fort. Red Fort. Beyond that, he did not command any respect also. The great Mughal Empire in it had disintegrated so fast. So fast. Why? Because the strength had turned out to be its major weakness also. It had turned out to be its major weakness. The moment the emperor had become weak, all of them declared independence. They stopped sending money to the emperor. Immediately resulted in the collapse of the empire, because the empire did not have any finances. They stopped sending money. That is where the Mughal Empire had major problems. So coming back here, this is what the administrative arrangement in Mughal Empire. as we have said, the Britishers initially in the Bengal province continued with the same arrangement. Initially, they continued with the same arrangement. After some point of time, as I said, they were not satisfied with this arrangement. Why? Because they were not getting the desired revenues from the districts. They were not getting the desired revenues, and there was a lot of pressure on the directors in India to show profits from their counterparts in London. So what did the Britishers do? They had replaced this Mughal administration with their own revenue administration. These military districts were replaced with what we called revenue districts. The military districts were replaced with revenue districts, and they had appointed an official to collect the revenue, known as collector of revenue. Later came to be known as district collector. District collector. So the district administration which they had introduced at that point of time continued even after independence also. It has continued even after independence also. We continued with the same district administration, with the same position called district collector. That is the reason why after independence we say that this term district collector is a misnomer. It is a misnomer. Why? Because after independence, what is the most important policy decision we have taken? We have abolished agricultural income tax. We have abolished agricultural income tax. Why? Because farmers were ruthlessly exploited by every regime for 5,000 years. Because till that point of time, the only source of revenue for the governments was land revenue. They used to charge 1/4 to 1/3, 25% to 33%. So the government had taken the decision that they would not impose any tax on agricultural income. Then what is the role of collectors then? The position itself had come into existence to maximize revenue collections. When they are not collecting the revenue, now that agricultural income tax is abolished, what are they doing now? What are they doing now? What are they doing? They are not doing anything. Don't try to cook up stories. District collector is the most useless person. Okay? They don't do anything. Of course, we will study what are the functions of district collector, and we will mention hundreds of functions. And you will be fearing also after we become collector. This is what we are expected to do. You will have fear also. We say that the district collector is responsible for everything that happens in the district. As a collector, he is responsible for maintenance of land records. As a magistrate, he is responsible for maintenance of law and order. As the chief electoral officer of the district, he is responsible for conducting elections right from panchayat bodies to the parliament. And as chief development officer of the district, he is responsible for implementing the developmental schemes of the governments, both central and state governments. As chief coordinator in the district, he is responsible for ensuring coordination between all the departments in the district. And then as a chief of the district disaster management authority, he is responsible for disaster management also. And as the chief protocol officer of the district, he is responsible for all protocol functions of the district. That is what we say. And you will be already having fear after we become collectors. This is what we are expected to do. Think about it again. Can you perform those functions or not? Don't worry, because all those illustrious people who got into services before you, they don't know that they have to perform any of these functions also. So you also don't have to fear about those things. Only thing is that in the examination you have to talk about the changing role of district administration since independence. You have to write beautifully about all these things. how the district collector is excellently performing all these functions. Okay, that is what happened with the district administration. Next thing that we have said they introduced was local self-governments. Local self-governments. And what did they do as part of local self-governments? It was Lord Ripon, who is known as the father of local self-governments in India. Lord Ripon, who is known as the father of LSGs in India, local self-governments in India. What did he do? He introduced local self-governments. Okay. Okay. They were there in India before that also. There is a panchayat, they were there in India before that also, in the villages. What he had done, he had given certain powers for panchayat bodies. The traditional authority of panchayats was transformed into legal authority. Traditional authority was transformed into legal authority. Certain powers were given to local self-governments in rural as well as in urban areas. In rural as well as in urban areas. In rural as well as urban areas. That is what he had done in rural as well as urban areas. Certain powers were transferred to local self-governments. Of course, what happened after that? The next governor generals and viceroys who came after him, they did not give much importance to local self-governments. They did not give any importance to local self-governments. The other governor generals and viceroys who came after Lord Ripon, they did not give any importance to local self-governments. They preferred bureaucratic rule at the local level. They preferred bureaucratic rule. That is, they preferred to rule with the district collectors. They preferred to rule with the district collectors than with people elected representatives. Than with people elected representatives. So the experiment was not successful. It was not successful. The experiment was not successful. Local self-governments was not successful. Experiment was not successful. And the district administration continued till independence. The rule of the district collector continued till independence. After independence also it continued till 1992. Till 1992, we did not have any local self-governments in India till 1992. We had real local self-governments only after the passage of 73rd and 74th amendments. We had a real local self-governments only after the passage of 73rd and 74th amendments. We will discuss again all of them as part of rural development and urban development. Next, after local self-governments, the next thing that Britishers introduced was Secretariat Administration. Secretariat Administration. What did they do? As part of Secretariat Administration, they came out with important institutions like Central Secretariat, Cabinet Secretariat, important institutions like Central Secretariat, Cabinet Secretariat, and Prime Minister's Office, and PMO. But during British times, the names were different. After independence, we changed the names. The names were different. After independence, we changed the names, but we continued with the same institutions. We continued with the same institutions. Then, as part of our analysis, we will discuss about what kind of reforms are required in these institutions also. Don't worry, we will be discussing about all these things. The entire syllabus is about only all these things. Even if you are not able to write what I am saying now, don't worry, because you will be writing the same things in the next 1 month. I will be repeating myself every day in the next 1 month. Okay. So if you write everything, tomorrow onwards you don't find anything new. So that is the reason why I am making sure deliberately that you will not be able to write anything. Okay. So don't worry about all these things. Okay. We will be discussing. In fact, do you want me to give the handwritten notes? Yes? Yes? Okay, no problem. So you don't want me to be a dictator? Who dictates? You want me to dictate things in the class, or you want me to give the handwritten notes so that both? Very good. What will you do? What will you do? This is what Indian mentality. You want everything and you end up with nothing. Okay. We always try to be too smart. That is where the problem with Indians. So which one do you want? You want me to give the notes? For all the lectures. Yes? You don't want the notes. You want to write it in the class. Your own individual efforts. Very good. Let us see that also. By tomorrow, the end of the class, there will be unanimous decision that you want only handwritten notes. Only thing is that what is the reason of dictating things in the class? You have to write also. You have to practice writing also. In the UPSC examination in 3 hours, you are writing in your general studies, you are writing 20 questions. In optional, you are writing 19 questions. When will you practice writing? At home, do you write at least every day for 1 hour? Are you writing? I am asking a question, As usual, you will be looking at me and I will be looking at you. That is what we always say. Your preparation is incomplete if you are not writing for 1 hour every day. That's what I always said also. If you are not eating or if you are not sleeping, I am not bothered. But if you are not writing, it means that you are not preparing for this examination. Every day you have to write for 1 hour. Why? Because you have to develop these abilities. These writing abilities do not come to people naturally. Not all of you are like the great writers. Not all of you. The Jawaharlal Nehru, he would write excellently, except that nobody could understand. He would speak so fluently, again, except that nobody could understand. Okay. Not all of you have that kind of communication skills. You have to develop the writing skills. You have to develop, and you have to you have to write for 3 hours, because clearing the preliminary examination, UPSC will not give you any gold medal. Preliminary examination is not an examination of selection. It is only an examination of elimination. So to get yourself selected, what is required is you need very good writing skills, mains examination. So we will see what can be done. If you want handwritten notes, I will give it to you, or if you want me to dictate, I will dictate. Whatever you want, I will do it. That is the problem with democracy. when you give real choices to the people, they don't know how to make use of these opportunities. That is the reason why India only needs dictatorship. Okay, I will decide whether to dictate or whether to dictate or discuss. Okay, in the true tradition of dictatorship, I will decide. Okay. So coming back here, that is what we have said, part of Secretariat Administration. Then we also introduced, British also introduced budgets and financial administration. They introduced budgets and financial administration. So what did they do as part of this? They introduced general budgets. General budgets. They also introduced railway budget. Till recently we had separate budgets for railways as well as general budget. Only last year we had merged railway budget with general budget. They had introduced railway budgets as well as general budgets. They had also introduced these accounting systems as well as auditing systems. Accounting and auditing systems. They also introduced accounting and auditing systems. They introduced accounting and auditing systems. They also introduced institutions like CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General of India, CAG. Then they also introduced these committee systems in Parliament. Committee systems in Parliament. Public Accounts Committee came into existence during British times. Committee systems in Parliament. So this is what they have done as part of financial administration. Then we will discuss about what are the changes that have taken place after independence also in financial administration. And the last one, did we mention? What is the last one? Is it over? This is the last. Okay. So this is what we say about impact of British rule on Indian administration. So what we say is that Britishers had introduced so many things, but they were never implemented either in letter or in spirit. They were never implemented either in letter or in spirit. After independence, what we have done, we have made significant changes to everything, right from the concept of rule of law to parliamentary form of government to federal system to civil services to district administration to secretariat administration to local self governments and to financial administration. One thing we must remember again, as I keep on saying, is that when the Britishers introduced all these things, their objective was not to maximize welfare of people or to ensure the growth and development of the country. Their objective was only to exploit the country. So all the institutions that they have introduced in India, they were highly exploitative in nature. And after independence, what do we say? We continued with the same institutions. That is what exactly Second Administrative Reforms Commission in its report say. It says that 21st century India is still ruled by 19th century rules and regulations that were introduced by the Britishers. That is the reason why our administrative structures are still exploitative in nature. That is the reason why our political structures have no accountability towards citizens. And that is the reason why our entire syllabus is all about how to reform our political and administrative structures. Political structures in the form of legislature, executive and judiciary, political structures in the form of union and state governments, political structures in the form of the local self-governments, and administrative structures in the form of this civil services, central secretariat, cabinet secretariat, PMO, and other administrative organizations. That is the reason why our syllabus is divided into polity and governance. That is what they do. So this is where I think we can stop it here for today, and tomorrow we will get into the core of the syllabus. Tomorrow we will start with the constitution. After independence, what happened? We will talk about how the constitution was framed. We will talk about the important value premises of our constitution. We will talk about constitutionalism. If we have to describe the entire syllabus of our syllabus in a single word, it is constitutionalism. For every question, you start your answer with constitutionalism and end with constitutionalism. That is what we will be discussing tomorrow. Right? And for whatever we have discussed today, the basic study material is, you can read, this book is there, Indian Administration by, Rajni Goyal and Arora. This you have to study both for your public administration as well as polity governance papers. The most important book, Indian Public Administration by Rajni Goyal and Arora. You can also study this Lakshmikant, Indian Polity. In Lakshmikant, you have some topics, the initial topics about the evolution of British rule in India, wherein he talks about all these acts from 1773 to 1947. All these acts you have to. So tomorrow we will discuss the rest of the things.